Good evening, everyone. It is nearly 7:30 p.m. Saturday, the 13th of February, and we're now entering into the third week, give or take, of February, and I'm going to have a look at the major currencies. I'm starting off with the US dollar index, and I'm going to mix things up a little bit. I want to change the formats and just see how this goes. What I'm going to do here is I've got a daily at the top and a weekly at the bottom, and really what I'm going to be doing here is looking at either effectively the flow of price or the lack of flow of price, which basically means is the market trending or is it going sideways. So starting with the dollar index, effectively, although we are technically in an uptrend of high lows, high highs on the daily, on the weekly we definitely have a more bearish than bullish. We have a flow to the downside. We have a catch-22 because we are sitting largely within a range, and we're also at a point where price can, if it's still, if we're going to look back in a couple of months' time and find that it's still within the range, this is the turning point. So we're going to see potentially that price could head a little bit higher. But looking at it now in isolation, the market is certainly bearish, has produced nice rejection candles, and is actually looking much more bearish than bullish. And therefore, based off of this, it makes more sense, especially looking at price action here, that it makes more sense that over the coming weeks, the US dollar is going to, or certainly the dollar index, is going to weaken and start to head a little bit lower. If I move across and look at euro dollar, so price is effectively range bound, but leaning towards the downside or leaning towards a weaker dollar. Looking here at euro dollar, what I find interesting here is that although we have produced lower highs and lower lows on the daily, we've retraced up relatively high, almost back up to the previous high. We haven't broken it yet. We finished off with a nice little bullish candle, even though it is a swing high. And on the weekly, we're looking relatively nice and bullish. So all of this implies that the euro dollar is looking somewhat bullish. It's bounced off a nice level of resistance, finding support. It implies that the flow looks a little bit more bullish than bearish, although I'm not convinced that we necessarily have a strong trend to the upside in our near future. I'd still am including the real possibility of range-bound behavior once we get to the top of the range, but for now it does certainly look as though that euro is has every intention this week of potentially breaking the high of last week and testing higher, which means a weaker US dollar. Moving on to have a look at cable, the sterling against the US dollar. The daily looking incredibly bullish. We've got a nice little bullish candle up here. Now it is right close to the top, but I do believe that it is looking, it would love to move on towards 1.4 and test that as resistance. That weekly looking really nice and bullish, and again, having broken free of previous highs, there's not a lot of holding it back. So to me, it's path of least resistance points towards 1.4 this week, which points again towards a weaker US dollar. Then having a look at the Australian dollar against the US dollar. This is beautiful, really, really nice trend. Beautiful pullback, nice, beautiful swing low there. Nice and bullish, again, hinting at that idea of pushing onwards. If the trend maintains itself, it's more likely to go on to 0.8. It's just got to get, past some local resistance here, but overall looking much more bullish than bearish and almost having broken these previous highs. So again, the current, unless something completely disrupts it, and there's nothing really in the news that's going to be a complete surprise, unless possibly Trump is convicted, which is very unlikely, as the Republican Party is not really interested in whether he is guilty or not. They're simply going to acquit him. And so I don't really expect it to be much change there. Now, having a look at the Kiwi dollar against the US dollar, this is ranging. It's largely sideways. It has been for several weeks. The overall flow is still to the upside. It's in a really good area here, this area of equilibrium where price is still looking bullish and it can look like it can push higher. But I'm not really seeing a lot of strength around the New Zealand dollar itself. So it seems to me that if it does push higher, that will be as a result of the US dollar weakening, and as a consequence, that New Zealand dollar strengthening. Moving on to dollar yen. Here we go. Of course, now price, I would note the price has moved above the moving averages. And so now at this point, it kind of looks a little bit more bullish than bearish, even though it has produced a swing high. The behavior here, again, not a complete surprise. Dollar yen, as per usual, is largely range bound. It looks a lot more bullish on that daily than the other charts do as such. So although it might get pushed lower, I'm not really seeing this as a fantastic opportunity laden instrument. I'm thinking that moves on that might not necessarily be that aggressive. And again, comparing that to say dollar Swissy looks really nice and bearish. It's pulled up into a beautiful level of support and tested that as resistance, produced that swing high. This price action is really nice and bearish. And for medium-term traders, for me, for example, as a medium-term trading opportunity, that might be a nice shorting opportunity. If the trend is going to resume from here, this is will in hindsight then look like a really good entry. So that price action is bearish, and again that leans towards that weaker US dollar, and then dollar CAD as well here. Now the only thing is that this price action here looks as though it's very much going sideways. It's range bound, although it is weak here. It may well find historical support if that's going to be the case and potentially turn around, and that is this level excuse me, here around 1.2650, 1.27. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. I'm almost certain there's going to be some bullish divergence in that, and so it's possible dollar CAD is going to break away, hit a little bit higher, or go a little bit sideways, while the rest of them generally fall in line with a weaker US dollar. So that's my expectation for this week. Looking at the charts, obviously I'll go through them in more detail, but looking at these so far, I really do like the Euro, GBP, and Aussie, as well as potentially dollar, Swissy, dollar, yen in that order, in terms of preference for opportunities, but I will also keep an eye on Kiwi dollar and dollar CAD if they do decide to catch up. And that's really it from me in terms of the major currencies. Thank you. Have a good week.